Shana Tova. I hope that you're finding your own voice, you're finding your way through this new Machzor. I will say personally that these last couple of months that we've had together with the Cantor and our ritual committee, and even personally, flipping through the pages of the Machzor, it has been one of the most meaningful high holiday preparations I've had in a very long time. Reading on the left-hand side of the page, the right-hand side of the page, above and below, I really think that I'm proud, very proud of this new Machzor, and very proud that we as a Reformed congregation have adopted it for our High Holy Days. And I do hope that you will continue to find your voice, continue to find your journey throughout the Yamim Noraim. All right, I have a question for everybody. So raise your hand. How many of you have a checklist or a to-do list at home or in the office? Raise your hand. Oh, come on. Those with you with not hands raised. You don't have a checklist? How many of you, okay, in one way or another have a system of keeping track of what you have to do? Okay, that's better. All right. How many of you have at least one, or maybe even more than one of those things on those lists that is absolutely urgent and needs to get done yesterday? All right, last question. How many of you are thinking about that urgent item right now? Be honest. Come on. We're all there. So in his best-selling book from a few years ago, Malcolm Gladwell told a story that took place at the Princeton Theological Seminary. Researchers split the seminary students up into two groups. Now, both groups were told that they had to take an exam. Group 1 was placed on one side of the campus, and Group 2 was placed on the other side of the campus. Group 1 was told, listen, when you're finished part 1 of the exam, you have to make your way across campus. But don't worry, you've got all the time in the world. They'll wait for you. Don't rush. Group 2, on the other hand, when they were told they were finished the first part of the exam, they were told, listen, time's tight. Make sure you make it across campus, because if you don't get there in time, the proctors will leave and you won't be able to take the second part of the exam. So one by one, these seminary students, theologians, workers for justice, leaders of the religious communities, made their way across the campus. And one by one, as they made their way across the campus, they happened to bump into somebody who was in need. And this person stopped the seminarian and said, excuse me, sir or madam, I need some help. Can you help me? Now put yourselves in the seminarian's shoes. What would you have done? Would you have stopped? What if you were in group 1 that said, you got all the time in the world to go across campus? Would you have stopped? Put yourself in the other group that said, you were late. If you don't make it to that second part of the exam, the proctors won't be there. Can't make it. Would you have stopped? Now think about who these people were. Seminarians. Future religious leaders. What do you think happened? The folks in group 1, most of them stopped. The folks in group 2, not many stopped. There it was right in front of them. Somebody in need, somebody asking for help. Yet some of them chose not to stop. Now here's where I could give a big sermon on taking deep breath, slowing down, and recognizing the blessings in our lives. But that's not the sermon for today, because I think there's something more important taking place in this story. We've all at some point been in a hurry and acted like the seminarians, because after all, it's only human. The lesson here, however, I believe, is that we live our lives too much in the urgent and not enough in the important. Think about those to-do lists. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches that the thing we spend most of our time pursuing, they turn out to be curiously irrelevant when it comes to seeing the value of life as a whole. He teaches that those things are urgent, but they are not, now say it with me, important. A few months back, I had quite the day as a rabbi. I began my day in the morning with a baby naming, and I ended my day leading a Shiva minyan. On my drive home that night, I thought much about the seminarians in our story. That morning, I shared in a simcha of a wonderful couple who, after years of trying to become parents, finally welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. Standing side by side, with tears of joy as you could imagine, we bestowed a Jewish name upon their baby daughter. They spoke of her grandparents, for whom she was named: courage, wisdom, family, strength, Judaism, humor, the values for which the family stood. They are the values they dreamt for their daughter. Hopes and dreams yet to be fulfilled for a new life, stories yet to be written, a life yet to be lived. And then at night, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. As we spoke the words of the mourner's Kaddish, I gently held her hand as her eyes welled with tears. Through the silence after our prayers, she spoke softly. Oh, but she spoke with such strength. He was a good man, a great husband, a mensch, stubborn, but that was okay. We loved him in all of his flaws. Of all of the baby namings, of all of the life cycle events that I have had the privilege to stand side by side with many of you, no one has ever spoken about a checklist undone. We do not dream for our children a life of lists. Rather, we dream for them lives with meaning and purpose. We remember not in our loved ones the lives, their unfinished work. Rather, we remember the tenderness of their touch, the love they shared, and the values they lived. It is incredibly easy to lose sight of what is important, as Rabbi Sachs teaches. Yet here's the gift that we get. We get the days of awe, the days of awareness, an awakening of our hearts and our souls to who we are and who we want to be in the world. This is the time of year we ask ourselves, are my actions and what I do in alignment with who I am and what is important? You and I, my friends, we are the seminarians throughout the year. We do not always stop. It doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us human. The Yamim Noraim are a time for us to remember that we can attend to what really needs to get done. We can do it. I promise we can, while not sacrificing our values and what is important. It's a time of year to remind ourselves that while we may be late for the exam, we can and should stop and still help the person in need. You know, this morning we recited the Nisim B'chol Yom, one of my favorite prayers in all of the Siddur. And we read the words, Pokeach Ivrim, to literally open the eyes of the blind. Our Machzor, however, translated as, your great power to open the eyes that cannot see. The blessing is not simply about physically opening our eyes, but it's about spiritually and emotionally opening our eyes and our hearts and our souls. The blessing is a call to awareness, much like the sound of the shofar, to ask ourselves, where are we focused? What are the values upon which I would like to act more? Questions lead us to awareness. They are the first step towards transformation, towards change. You know, each of us has our own unique Jewish journey. It's ours. We travel on it alone, but with our community. And I think it's engaging on that unique Jewish journey that can help us refocus, recalibrate, and move us from awareness to change. We are each here in this sanctuary for different reasons. We may be here looking for inspiration. We may be searching. We may be here out of guilt. And we may even be here out of obligation. But it doesn't matter. We're all here together. Whatever the reason is, we have all chosen, you have all chosen to take that first step of awareness. This year, making my way through the new Machzor and doing my own Cheshbon HaNefesh, my own accounting of the soul, my own spiritual and religious journey, because after all, that's what we do at this time of year. And if I'm going to ask all of you to do that sacred work, then I too, as your rabbi, must and do engage in that meaningful work. I found inspiration in learning about the history of our temple. Not sure if you know, but this is our 60th anniversary. And so 60 years ago, two women, Sidel Fieber and Carol Schechtman, did I get their names right? Right, thank you, Karen. They were programming chairs for the Jewish organization ORT. And while they were planning the programs, they realized that there was not actually a Reform synagogue here in Livingston, New Jersey. So together with 9 other families, so there were 11 total, they founded a Reform synagogue here in Livingston, New Jersey. They wanted a place that they and their children could learn and grow and practice their faith so they could bring meaning and purpose and reflection into their lives. They founded, 60 years ago, what synagogue? What synagogue? Actually, no. Ready? They founded the Reform Temple of West Essex, only to become known but a few years later as Temple Emmanuel of West Essex. I was surprised to learn and confirmed by those who know that the original name of this very community was the Reform Synagogue of West Essex. Reform Judaism is not Judaism light. Reform Judaism is not defined by what we don't do, rather what we do. Our founding families knew this and they understood this. In a vision of Reform Judaism a few years back, we wrote, Reform Judaism is the living expression of Torah and tradition in our modern lives. As Reform Jews, we make thoughtful and informed choices about how we put our values into action. We explore our spirituality. We engage in reflection, study, and sacred acts in order to renew our living covenant with God and the Jewish people. Reform Judaism is about embracing the tension and living in between tradition and innovation, which our new Machzor does extremely well, I believe. I believe our Reformed Jewish tradition, our Reformed Judaism, can help us, as Rabbi Sachs teaches, to see the greater whole and choose to act on what is important. Reform Judaism is a Judaism of the head and the heart. It exists not only in the intellect, but teaches us that through ritual and prayer, we can be inspired to transform ourselves and the world in which we live. Yet I believe the strength of Reform Judaism rests actually right here in this sanctuary with each and every one of us. Each of us is on a unique Jewish path. Each of us is on a unique Jewish journey. We have a diversity of practice and belief here in the sanctuary. And that's the beauty of what it means to be part of this Kila Kadoshah, this sacred Jewish community. This is what our founding families understood when they wanted to build a community and call it the Reform Temple of West Essex. This year, I believe, or these days of awe, we must ask ourselves, how am I going to relate to my own unique Jewish journey this year? How will that help us move from awareness to action? How will it challenge ourselves and one another to live an authentic Jewish life as possible? And committing to be intentional about the Jewish lives we live, not here in this sanctuary, but out there in the world in which we live. Some of us will find it in ritual. Some of us will find that in prayer. Some of us will find it in social justice, and still some of us will find it in other places. And I believe as we engage in that journey intentionally, we'll begin to see, and I mean really see, as Sachs teaches, the value of life as a whole, and move from the urgent into the Karen Solomon shared with me this past couple of months some amazing historical documents from our synagogue. Her father, Karel Waller, of course, was the very first president. And she shared with me his speech as the first president in 1956. The words he wrote then, I could have just delivered his sermon. He wrote, "It rests with us to strive of a richer and more ennobling life. When all of our labor and striving has come to full fruition, when we have made out of ourselves, out of our lives, the best that we could hope for, we have achieved much on the road of godliness. There is no place in our lives in which we can accomplish more in reaching out towards the complete fulfillment of our better selves than in our religious activities. He went on to finish that speech. Then we can say so eloquently, and this is, I believe, where the name Emmanuel comes from. He said so eloquently, then we can say, Emmanuel, God is indeed with us. So the other name of our synagogue is Temple. And that means, were you listening? God is. So to do the work of Cheshbon HaNefesh, to do the work of recognizing what is important and what is urgent, we have to open our hearts and our souls to the divine presence in our lives. What Karel was reminding the members then, and I believe all of us now, is that the name of our temple is no coincidence. The name of our temple is meant to inspire us, to remember that indeed, Emmanuel, God is with us. And if, I believe, as he challenged us, we do this, imagine how differently our world and one another and our lives could be. Take a look at the words behind me on the ark. Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. Indeed, God is in this place. Comes from the book of Genesis, when Jacob was dreaming of a ladder and there were angels ascending and descending. And he wakes up from that dream and he's in awe of the place in which he was sleeping. And he says, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh ve'ani eineni yodea. God was in this place. Behold, God was in this place. And I did not know it. I think our founding families would be proud to know that these words are emblazoned on the top of our ark, written to remind us that indeed, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. God is in this place because of you and I. Not because this is a holy sanctuary, but because you and I are here. Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. God is in this place when we concentrate, when we live our values, when we do what is important rather than what is urgent. Throughout the year, and indeed throughout each day, we lose our way. We're no different than the seminarians because, after all, once again, we are only human. But here in Rosh HaShanah, together, as we do each and every year, we have an opportunity, first, to take a breath. That's your cue, take a breath. To bring ourselves to awareness. Awareness that we are imperfect in this world. So take a moment to think back to your to-do lists. How many of you can picture them? I can. Come on, be honest. How many of you can see those lists? Now, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I want you to make a different list. What do you think is on that list? The things that are important. Family, friends, love, justice, work, golf. Put the list side by side. Think about the seminarians and remember that you can get across campus and do what you need to do while not forgetting to do what is important. You know, on that day I spent with the two families, there was much talk about names. One name represented a life yet to be lived, and another name told a story full of beauty and joy, a life fully lived. It reminded me of a saying the rabbis have. There are three names by which a person is called. One which their parents call them, one which people call them, and one which they earn for themselves. I think that last line, the name we earn for ourselves, we have a lot to learn from. So on this Rosh Hashanah, as we think about all of the urgent things in our lives that we need to do, and we remind ourselves of all of the important things that we really need to do, let us ask ourselves, as we engage in a sacred work of Cheshbon HaNefesh, the accounting of the soul, what name will you, what name will we acquire in the year ahead? Shana Tova.